I think we can all agree Raksha is one of the hardest bosses in RuneScape 3 and will be for years to come. In this video we're going to break down what makes Raksha so hard and why players like myself struggle with this boss. So when you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax and enjoy. I want to give a little disclaimer before I start the video off. The fact that this boss is a hard boss is a good thing. Like some people have said, you don't have to do the boss, and the fact that it is geared towards high level players that are very experienced at PvM can force you to get better at the game. That is correct. That being said, this boss was advertised as entry-ish level high level PvM, which it clearly isn't. And still might not be after the nerf. I'm not entirely sure if I like or dislike the fact that this boss is getting nerfed so early on. Perhaps an enrage system could have been a nice addition to this boss. I'm not entirely sure. So the first thing that becomes immediately apparent when you start the Raksha boss fight is the constant need to prayer flick. If you do not prayer flick at Raksha, you will take massive hits every single time, unless they splash, of course. Now, prayer flicking in itself really isn't that bad as long as you keybind your prayers. Let's take Jad as an example. The only real mechanic Jad has is punishing hits and the fact that you need to switch your prayers. Except for the Jad in the Fight Caves, which does actually have 3 of these things on the list, which also includes boss healing, as you do have healers to deal with. Now, as some of you guys know, who've seen the video, I've done a full free-to-play fight kiln, including free-to-play abilities, supplies, and prayers. And the only real challenging thing is keeping focused while prayer switching at the Jads. And of course, the final boss in the Dill Waves, but you understand what I mean. Prayer flicking at these Jads with free-to-play gear is the only real thing you need to focus on, because damage-wise, you won't be doing much and you can just stick to Revolution and drag out the fight as long as you want. Now, Raksha, which, what you're seeing on screen are some of my older solo clips. I do know more about the boss now thanks to doing some duo kills. But at Raksha, DPS is definitely important because you can skip certain mechanics by DPSing down a phase quite quickly. This 100% adds to the difficulty of any boss. Let's take Araxor for example. What phase do you think is the hardest at Araxor? Pretty much everyone watching this video will most likely say phase 4. Why phase 4? Because you can have mirror backs if the minion path is open, you need to prayer flick, you need to deal damage as quickly as you can because there's a black blob that flies around at around 20 or 30k HP. I kind of forgot what exact HP it was, but if you kill the boss quick enough, you won't really have to deal with that mechanic. But if you don't, that thing will keep hopping around. All the more reason to kill Raksha quickly, adding to the stress and adding to the difficulty, especially at higher enrages, where missed prayer flicks become more and more punishable. The next mechanic I want to talk about goes hand in hand with decent DPS, because Raksha does have boss healing and a sort of copy of the Ambassador Spinner mechanic. I call this a sort of copy of the Ambassador Spinner attack because if you're not fast enough with your DPS, Raksha will siphon in phases 1 and 2, which will also have 5 bombs go off, which you can devotion using a magic hit. It isn't actually typeless damage, so you can take 0 damage from these, or you can use resonance to grab a fat heal. The reason I call these two mechanics similar is because both the spinners and blobs need to be killed, unless for Ambassador's mechanic you have enough DPS to skip them. By the way, the spinners do not heal the Ambassador if you fail to kill them. You will take a certain amount of bombs depending on how many spinners you left alive, and for Raksha's mechanic you can skip the siphon if you have enough DPS to get into phase 2 quickly. The blobs do not have anything to do with the amount of bombs, the bombs will always be 5 during a siphon. And in phase 3 at Raksha, the blobs simply heal him without him having to siphon them, which makes the boss fight significantly harder unless you bladed dive with something like laceration boots to kill the blobs quickly. Corruption blast, dragonfire chain, chins, all that kind of stuff are good ways to kill off the blobs, but they definitely do make the boss fight longer and harder because you do need to focus on multiple things, and that's something that is very difficult. Also, boss healing is something you see in other very hard bosses in RuneScape, like the hands in the final phase of the Ambassador that you have to kind of block, Telos' tendrils, and that should give you an idea that this mechanic does definitely make some bosses a little harder. You have to focus on, again, more things than normal. Okay, so here are some mechanics that are similar to other boss mechanics, but you have all of them at Raksha, and to be honest, if you do everything perfectly, these really aren't that big of a deal whatsoever. You have to move around, you have to avoid the rocks, you don't have to get stunned if you anticipate and freedom at the right time. You can avoid the charge by surging away, resonancing it, using escape, moving out of the way. The swipe can be avoided by just moving out of the way just in time after counting the attacks. The prayer knockoff from the bombs can be avoided by just not getting hit by the bombs, but if you do get hit by these attacks, they hit so hard. Let me show you a worst case scenario of probably one of my ugliest kills after I mess up one of the bombs. Just look. I got hit by the bomb, it stunned me, it knocked off my prayer. I tried to resonance, but I didn't have resonance, so I took the next hit from Raksha as well. And eventually I end up dying in a charge because I was focusing on the minion that was distracting me as well. And this is what can happen. And really, it happened a lot. And to be honest, it's how you learn a boss, obviously. So let's talk about the bombs first. The bombs that knock off your prayer, the shadow bombs, and deal a massive hit and leave fire behind. There's nothing like them in game, I think. But the fire itself is found in elite dungeon bosses and at Vindicta. As for prayer knockoffs, I can only think of Next Ice Prisons. I did actually ask my Discord and they said that as well. As for the falling rocks, you see these in Bandos hard mode and in Telos phase 5, and in phase 4 they start appearing after 1000% in rage. As for minion spawns, they aren't really the biggest deal at Raksha, but you see them in elite dungeons, AOD, Virago, etc. Now the main thing that really annoys me is the stuns from those bombs. Stuns remind me of Calfight King solos. Calfight King solos is one of the most punishing and hard things you can do in RuneScape 3. I've done it, I've made a guide out of it, but I've died so many times. Because one mistake at Calfight King and you are dead regardless because the green is an instant kill. I think Calfight King solos are subjectively a little easier than Raksha solos as of right now. It is of course a new boss, so it's hard to judge. But at Raksha solos, if you mess up one of those bombs, especially if it's one of the last bombs, there's a just as good chance you'll die because you'll get stunned, your prayer gets knocked off, and if you don't have resonance ready or surge or whatever, there's a chance you'll get chomped by Raksha, which can hit very hard, or you'll get hit by the next auto attack, and without resonance ready and your prayer off, there's a very good chance of you dying unless you take it extremely quickly to eat up. The same can be said for those rocks falling down. There's so many rocks falling down in between the phases that it's sometimes a little hard to anticipate where they'll land and when. I've died to these and it's very frustrating. As for the random melee chomps, sometimes Raksha seems to have extra range. I've been chomped by Raksha from, it feels like a few tiles away, randomly sometimes, and you can get like a 3 or 4k hit. And if you are actually trying to save food and ready to resonance the next range or magic hit, you wouldn't be eating up, and at that point you'd be dead. So I guess it might be better to keep your health up high. As for the charges, they are easier to avoid than the tail swipes if you aren't counting attacks. But if you aren't counting attacks, the tail swipes are so instant, and they have quite a large hitbox that you might just die right there and then. It's a lot harder to anticipate than the Crassian Leviathan swipe, for example, which is a lot slower. And if you're standing in the middle of the arena, it's pretty easy to avoid. Now there are two other mechanics I haven't really mentioned, being the orbs you have to click on, which are a pretty cool mechanic. You can soul split on Raksha while clicking on these orbs, or soul split on the minion that may be spawned. As for the instant kill in phase 4, you either destroy the shield by using thresholds, quite easy to do in duos actually, or you just stand behind the pillar to avoid the instant kill. This really isn't where the boss is difficult. The boss is difficult because you have to do so many things at once, especially if you're kiting, which was what I was doing. I was running around, trying to kill the blobs, trying to do damage on Raksha, trying to avoid the charges, trying to anticipate freedom in time, counting the attacks, flicking between melee, range and magic prayer, and occasionally soul split to heal back, resonancing here and there, sometimes too late because the hit was already flying at me, or he melee chomps me instead. There are so many things you need to keep an eye on that just make this boss overwhelming, and once you make one mistake, there's a very good chance of you dying, and this is why I didn't particularly enjoy the boss. I do not like prayer flicking, 3 different styles while kiting. It just feels awful with the tick system. The tick system isn't an excuse to me not getting a solo kill yet, it's because I gave up. I decided to do some duos with both James Rakke and my friend Plebshot. James Rakke actually got me my first kill, and it was super easy because all I had to do is basically do my DPS rotation, look out for some mechanics, of course, look out for the instant kill, while just switching between ranged and magic prayers, and it's a lot easier for me, and that's why I enjoyed it more. It's more casual almost, it feels a lot easier. It still isn't easy, but it's definitely a lot easier than what the base tank was doing, because the base tank has to switch. It's basically the same as solos, except you have someone else who can help you with the blobs and dealing damage while you focus on prayer flicking and keeping Raksha from charging. It's pretty much like that. So to sum it up, what makes Raksha so hard? First of all, the prayer flicking is beyond the average PVMer's ability, because we haven't had a boss that requires you to prayer flick constantly for long periods of time. I think the only exception might be Telos at high end rages, but the average high level RuneScape 3 PVMer doesn't do much prayer flicking. The most they'll do is switch at the Sanctum Guardian or the mage hit at the Ambassador. There isn't too much prayer flicking. Araxor's prayer flicking final phase is only a minute or less, so it isn't something you do for 6 to 10 minutes. With Raksha you do. Second of all, the auto attack hits are insanely high. They will be adjusted slightly at the start, I believe, with the nerf coming next week. But regardless, they are higher than pretty much anything in the game, and that's with bosses that only use high auto attack hits every so often, every like 4 attacks for example. That's a big deal. I think Telos at high end rages is the only exception. I was, by the way, going to make an Excel spreadsheet showing all the hits from big bosses, elite dungeon bosses, Sanctum Guardian splash attack, Masuta's attacks, which are very painful by the way, and of course Araxor, but since the boss is getting an adjustment, I'm just going to wait with that. I don't think it's worth my time as of right now. But if you're interested in something like that, let me know. As for the boss getting nerfed, yes, that will make it a little better and a little less frustrating. Will it really matter for people that can't get a kill now? I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how they keep adjusting Raksha from now on. As for the nerf, I don't think it was necessary per se. They could have just added an enrage system instead, or made a hard mode a normal mode of the boss, and made the normal mode slightly easier for people wanting the Reaper Crew achievement for those extra stats. I don't really know, guys. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and some comparisons I made to existing bosses in RuneScape 3, because pretty much every single mechanic Raksha has is in another boss in the game already in some shape or form, except for the orbs and shield thing, I think. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it interesting. If you did, leave a like down below and maybe even consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.